Next, from Springfield, we attend a speech from Amy Walter, the national editor of the Cook Political Report, as she discusses the 2016 presidential campaign so far and what lies ahead for Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This runs about 55 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me. Hello, Springfield. As Mark is correct, I grew up in the northwest suburbs, and the last time I was here, I was in 8th grade. And the infamous, I'm sure everybody who went to school here knows, you have to make a trip to Springfield at some point for your social studies or history, and I haven't been back, so thank you for bringing me back, and I gotta go. I have 1 hour between ending this and going back, and I'm gonna go see the Lincoln Museum and take a lot of pictures for my nephew who's obsessed with Abraham Lincoln. So I'm gonna get good. Thank you for letting me get good on award. I'm also glad to be in a state that you guys know a little bit about politics and apparently a little bit about political dysfunction. So this is nothing new for you, perhaps, to see what's happening at the federal level, but I'm hoping to give really some background as to how we got here, as well as to talk about where we go from here, and then to take questions and comments from you all. You know, it's funny, when this race started, and it's been kind of crazy from the very beginning, I sort of joked around about, we had to have a theme for this election, like it's the economy, stupid, or it's the soccer moms, or whatever every year has one of those themes. And I came up with something that I thought was pretty good, which was, and very simple. You could put it on a bumper sticker, slap it on the back of your car, and it was 2016 : WTF, exclamation point, question mark, right? Just WTF. That was a whole election. Just summed it perfectly. Didn't have to say anything else. But the more time that I've spent in and around this campaign, and the more time that I've tried to figure out how it is that we got to this place, the more I recognize how unremarkable this race actually is. And in fact, the more remarkable thing is that it took this long for this election to happen, because it's been brewing and bubbling for a long time. This isn't just about Donald Trump, and this isn't just about a unique moment in time. I think this is a reaction to many moments over the last 20 or 25 years. And if you just think about the amount of change and the scope of, just think of the scope and the pace of change that we've seen in this country over the last 20 or 30 years, it's pretty breathtaking, right? And I'm not just talking about at an economic or technological level. I mean, the iPhone alone is pretty remarkable, and how it's changed everything from the way we interact with each other to how you all do business. But think about the demographic changes, the cultural changes, the economic and technological changes that have occurred just within the last 20 or 30 years. I mean, we have Google and gay marriage and globalization, and all of these things are happening in a very compressed amount of time. And I just don't know that there's been a time, certainly not in recent American history or in our lifetimes, where we've seen this much change packed into this narrow of a window, this short amount of time. And it's left, I think, so many of us sort of feeling off balance. I hear that a lot when I talk to voters and sit in focus groups about people feeling like they don't quite know where they fit anymore. Where do they fit with the economy changing the way it is? Where do they fit in a country that is literally changing demographically and culturally every single year? And so that feeling of being off balance and not finding center anymore has, I think, a lot to do with the reason that you're seeing the rise of these kinds of candidates who don't fit the traditional political bill, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. And you put on top of this, not only that people are feeling off balance from this pace of change, they don't think that the institutions that should be helping to really rein in or make this change understandable or to help put some boundaries around it. They don't trust that the institutions that are supposed to be working for them are actually doing that. And if you look just across a whole wide range of institutions, and the Gallup organization has been doing this for quite some time, they've been asking voters for years, what is your confidence level in major institutions? Not just corporations and school and government, but also religious institutions, organized religion, major league sports, the police, the military. What you're finding is a low level of confidence in these groups, in some cases a historically low level of confidence in every pillar of our society. And we don't believe that the institutions are prepared and can accurately and actively guide us through this change and through this time of tumult. And we didn't trust that if they could do it, they would do it looking out for us. They don't have our best interests in mind. When I look at everything from how voters feel about everything from journalists, who they've always hated and continue to hate even more, politicians, always dislike even more, but the Supreme Court, which we used to think of as something that was outside of our political sphere, that was not much partisanship, now has an approval rating or a confidence rating that's 12 points below its normal historical average. Confidence in, not surprisingly, in the police and in organized religion are as low as they've ever been. Only two institutions have an overall positive rating, that's the military and small businesses, and everybody else is underwater. So again, tremendous change, people feeling like they're unmoored. They don't believe that the institutions can help solve these problems, and they don't believe even if they do solve them, it will be to their benefit. So that helps, I think, explain the sort of toxic brew here that was ripe for the kinds of candidates to emerge that we've seen emerge in this election. And you sprinkle on top of all of this the economic instability and insecurity that so many Americans feel. We have been seeing an economy that for many people had stuck and stagnated long before we hit the economic crash in 2008. Really, since the turn of the 21st century, we've seen, for many middle-class Americans, their wages have basically stayed flat. We're seeing median household wealth in this country stagnated as well. There was a really interesting study in the Washington Post a few months back, looking at the median net worth of middle-income families 30 plus years ago till today. So back in 1983, that median income household wealth, was $95,000. In 2014, it was $98,000. Okay, so when folks say to me, and I hear this a lot from voters, gosh, I feel like I'm working harder than ever, I feel like I'm doing more than ever, and yet I'm not getting ahead, I just feel stuck. It's not just their perception, it's the reality that for many, many, many people, they feel like they trapped and stuck. And so when you talk about whether it's on the Bernie Sanders rigged economy, or if you're on the Donald Trump side about the fact that it is the globalization is to blame, there is certainly a receptive audience for that argument. And then, and you guys appreciate this more than many others, which is the deep, deep polarization we see in this country that goes beyond just blue and red, but it is now a sense that compromise is a dirty word, that there are no more moderates left. I certainly witnessing this in Congress. I'm old enough to remember there used to be these crazy things called moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. They existed. It's not just unicorns. They elected people in the South who were Democrats, and they elected Republicans in the North. I know, can you believe it, kids? There were delegations that would pretty regularly split one Dem and one R and send it to the Senate, or have a Republican and a Democratic governor that would sort of go back and forth every 4 or 8 years. Now, over the course of the last, I would argue the last 20, 25 years, we've seen a purging of the middle. Some of that is because of the reality of how elections have gone in these wave elections year after year. The people who have lost, the people who don't come back to Washington are the very people that need to be there in order to do the compromising. We, though, as Americans, are to blame for this as well. We have become more tribal. We have become less willing to split our tickets, voting for the party of, voting for one party for president, another party for Congress. We have isolated and insulated ourselves with technology. There was a whole thing this week, I'm sure many of you saw, about Facebook and the controversy over whether they are consciously taking out conservative viewpoints from their feed, from their news feed. And that may be true, may not be true. We're going to have an interesting debate about that. But before that controversy happened, I think the more pernicious piece of Facebook is that we consciously have been insulating ourselves from different voices and different views. We pick our friends, we choose people that we want to follow, and I'm sure many of you have done this, because I have too. That person that shows up in your news feed that you're like, this person is cuckoo crazy, I'm not listening to what they have to say. And they're cuckoo, or you think they're crazy, or they're annoying, mostly because they have a point of view that's different from yours. And so what we do is we listen to the same people telling us the same things over and over again. And sociologists will tell you that even if you're not you don't see yourself as particularly hard line, whether it's Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, the more you're around people that have like-minded views, the more extreme you get in your own views, and that your community gets in its views. And so we now are in a country where this was the most recent Pew poll, which if those of you who are interested in looking at where we're going as a country and understanding who we are, the Pew organization has been doing fantastic work on this. But they came out last year with some really dire data. And again, not just that we disagree with each other, or we don't like each other, or that we're polarized, and more polarized than we've been in the last 40 years, but that we really don't like each other. And it's not just like, I would never vote for a Democrat, I'd never vote for a Republican. 27% of Democrats and 38% of Republicans believe that the other party's policies, and this is their quote, threaten the nation's well-being. Okay? Like, if I vote for a Republican, I'm basically saying that the world is going to end, that they're going to destroy America. If I vote for a Democrat, they are going to destroy America, right? Believe that. Believe that. So again, not just we disagree, and we disagree about not just how we solve problems, but what the problems actually are. Since 2007, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll has been asking the question about, do you think that the president, his number one goal, should be to focus on, this is their words, progress, moving America forward, which was essentially the Obama message from the 2008 campaign, or should it be to protect what has made America great? So long before Donald Trump put that on his hat, the NBC poll has been asking that question. Again, moving forward, is that what we should be doing? Is that what the president should be focusing on? Not where we've been, but much more where we go, versus what's going to make us better going forward is focusing on what made us great. And since 2007, so this precedes Trump, since 2007, 2/3 of Republicans have said we got to focus on what has made America good, great, or how did they pronounce it? Yeah, what's made America great. And 70 to 85% of Democrats said we need to focus on moving America forward. Okay? So one party literally going this way, the other party going that way. It's hard to get to the middle when we don't even agree on which direction we should be headed. Right? So that's why I said I'm not, at the end of the day, it shouldn't be that surprising that this is the election that we've gotten, because this is the environment in which these candidates are running. And Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, better than any other candidate, either by luck or that they were smart enough to figure out that this was the environment in which they're running in, and they consolidated and were able to benefit, and they read the mood of this electorate better than anybody else. Except that one of them is going to be the nominee of his party and the other one isn't, okay? So one of them succeeded, one of them didn't. I'll look at that for a second. The Republican side, of course, much more interesting to look at this point, as it has been throughout the process. Look, Donald Trump didn't break the Republican Party. The Republican Party was pretty broken before Donald Trump ever got there, right? And in fact, the last time I remember that the Republican Party was actually united and unified around policy, ideology, strategy, was probably back in the 2004 election. And ever since then, what you've been watching is the gradual sort of breakup of the Republican Party into different factions. And some of that was started during the George W. Bush administration on ideology, specifically fiscal policy. I talked to a lot of conservative fiscal Republicans in the early 2000s about their frustration with the Bush administration's decision to push forward and pass the Medicare prescription Part D legislation, right? A lot of Republicans saying, whoa, 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 whoa. What are Republicans doing expanding entitlements? That's not a Republican ideology. We're fiscal conservatives. We don't bring on more debt. We don't expand these things. We're supposed to be, reforming them. They're equally upset about the No Child Left Behind legislation, right? What on earth is federal government doing, getting in the business of what the state government and states should be doing and local institutions should be doing, which is the business of education and the schools. And the Iraq War, of course, brought to the front a very strong, something that has, I think, always been there, but started to become even a bigger piece of the Republican fracturing, which is the rise of the libertarian Republican, wanted to get America out of being the police officer of the world, to get us out of the role that we were playing, especially in the Middle East and in Iraq, and who saw that the rise in the surveillance state, the wiretapping was problematic. And the 2010 party was as much a reaction to Republican leadership as it was to Obama and Obamacare. Right? You had a lot of Republicans running that year who were running as much about how the leadership in the Republican Party had let them down as they were about, well, putting a check onto the Obama administration and the Democrats who control Congress. And that frustration continued 2012, 2014, right, with Republican rank and file, many of them saying, I don't understand what Republican leadership is doing. They don't seem to be getting the job done. Many Republican voters feeling betrayed by the fact that they'd been told year after year that if you just elected Republicans, they would go to Washington and they'd get rid of Obamacare. And they would stop all of those executive orders and they would put an end to the Obama administration's overreach, and they didn't do any of it. So this isn't something that Donald Trump invented. But he walked into a room that is essentially filled with propane tanks, and he just threw a match on top of it, okay? Or 2 or 3 matches. And his ability to win this nomination was as much about the fact that he was able to benefit from a fractured party, so you didn't need to win a majority. You know, I kept saying at the beginning of this, when I was absolutely totally wrong about why Donald Trump wouldn't be the nominee, I kept saying, well, his problem is that, you know, he's not going to get 50%. He can't consolidate the base. There's just, the party's too fractured. Somebody else is going to figure out that he has a ceiling, and they're going to consolidate the rest of it, and then he will come up short. Well, the problem was nobody consolidated the other 2/3 of the party, or a little less than 2/3, and he's able to win the nomination with about 42% of the overall vote. And how he did that as well was that while he didn't consolidate the Republican voters, he did own one group of voters that we've been hearing a lot about, and that I think Republicans haven't paid enough attention to in the last 2 elections, and that's voters who are non-college educated, who are not white-collar voters, who feel like they have absolutely been left behind over the last 20 years. We talk about whether it's on wages, whether it's on trade deals, whether it's cultural issues, demographic issues. They had been somewhat ignored. They had been never directly appealed to before Donald Trump came there. And so his attacks on China and trade and building a wall found a very receptive audience. And he, though he did not win more than 40%, as I said, of the overall vote, he captured close to half of all Republican voters in these primaries who don't have a four-year college degree. That has been a key component to his success. Now, the Democratic side, it's a little easier to diagnose. Bernie Sanders got a lot of people interested in his message, which resonates specifically with young people. The divide generationally between Bernie voters and Hillary Clinton voters is remarkable. It's literally like if you're under 45%, there's a 70 to 80% chance you voted for Bernie Sanders. If you're over 45, there's a 70 to 80% chance you voted for Hillary Clinton. And a big piece of why Bernie Sanders has done so well with younger voters goes to who these younger voters are and when they grew up. Okay, this is the so-called Millennial Generation. When I talked about people feeling, overall feeling that they don't have confidence in institutions in this country, the Millennial Generation is on top of the list for feeling betrayed by institutions, right? They've not known a world, any other world, but one in which there's disruption economically. So the banks and Wall Street and corporate America certainly have not felt like they've been constructive or helpful to them, where government has been completely dysfunctional. They live in a 9/11 world. They don't know of a world before there was Al-Qaeda or ISIS or bin Laden. And they've had a steady diet of scandals ranging from doping in sports to the Catholic Church abuses. So this is a generation that was both disgusted with the status quo, which of course somebody who's been in politics for 25 years like Hillary Clinton embodies, and desperate for authenticity, which Bernie Sanders brings, okay? Now Bernie Sanders has given that same speech that he's giving to these rallies of 30,000 people for 25 years. But it's a speech that they hadn't heard before and resonated with them in a way it didn't with previous generations. And so his success there is significant, but it wasn't enough. Winning younger voters, winning independent voters, which he also did very well with, and winning with white voters was important, but it's not big enough to overcome Hillary Clinton's advantage among the other key components and elements of the Democratic coalition, which is women and African Americans and older voters and core Democratic voters. And at the end of the day, she's actually going to win by a bigger percentage of the vote than Obama did. I think people sort of forget how close that 2008 race was. The percent of the popular vote that Obama won over Hillary Clinton was about 1 or 2%. Okay? It was like 48.9 to 48.7, something like that. So he barely beat Hillary Clinton in that race. The delegate count, much bigger in terms of her pledged delegates, not the super delegates, but she's won over a bigger number of pledged delegates than Obama did over her. And yet, we look at this race going forward and we go, if she's doing so well, how come she looks so weak, right? How come she looks weaker than where Obama did? And that's where we start this race, which is actually with two candidates who are the weakest candidates and the most unpopular candidates we have seen in modern American history. So you're welcome, America. This is what we have. That's why, predictions about this race are complicated in that we know that Donald Trump is incredibly polarizing and has lots and lots of problems, but so does Hillary Clinton, right? If it weren't for Donald Trump, she would be the most polarizing candidate in the history of American politics or modern American politics. So let me give you an example of this, and this is why we just don't know what do you do when you take two people who are wildly unpopular and throw them against each other and then ask people to vote for them. I've joked about this recently, but you know how in campaigns they talk about, people want to vote for the guy they want to have a beer with, right? Who would you rather have a beer with? And that was the famous Al Gore, George W. Bush, right? Like, Al Gore seems fine, but I'd rather have a beer with George W. Bush. This is not a race about who you want to have a beer with. This is who would you like to throw a beer at? In fact, the most recent, I wrote about this week, but going back to 1984, we have never seen two candidates who are getting the majority of their vote from people who are only voting for them because they dislike their other option rather than they like that person, okay? So almost 60% of Republicans and Democrats say they are voting either for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton as a vote against the other person, not for their candidate. Before this historic election, the most unpopular Democrat in our modern era to be the nominee for their party, so at this point in the campaign, was Bill Clinton. Okay, 1992, April of 1992, Bill Clinton's overall approval rating, so take approval plus his disapproval rating, you come up with the net, was minus 11. Okay, that's pretty bad. Hillary Clinton's is minus 24. And yet, hold on, gets better. Mitt Romney was the most unpopular Republican to be the nominee of his party since 1992, and he was at this point, minus 3. Donald Trump is at minus 41. All right, so we are in uncharted waters here, people. Really, really looking forward to this race. So that gets us to, okay, well, if you have two really unpopular people, how do you decide who's going to win that race? And this is where I think Hillary Clinton starts off with a benefit, again, because of who Donald Trump is, not because of who she is. Look, if this were a normal election, which obviously it is not, if she were running against somebody who did not have negatives as high as he does, who's not as polarizing, especially among the rising American electorate that I'll get to in a minute, she would be in trouble. Not only does she have very high negatives, but she is running as the embodiment of the status quo, right? At a time when most Americans are feeling at best mixed about the current president, though he's getting higher marks now than he has been in recent, probably in the last year. The president's approval rating's higher now. I would argue a lot of that is in reflection of the clown show that's going on in the primaries. It looks a lot better. But voters obviously feeling very mixed about the economy, feeling very stressed about America's place in the world, terrorism, and just the direction of the country, right? I sit in these focus groups and I listen to voters when they're asked the question of, give one word to describe America today, and it's like disappointing, scary, sad, depressing, right? These are not people who are like, woohoo, things are awesome. I've not heard one person yet say, things are great. Things are going awesome for me and my family and the country, right? This is the time in which, if you're Republican, it's a pretty easy playbook. You run against the status quo, and Hillary Clinton is the perfect embodiment of that. But what Donald Trump allows her to do is make the race about him instead of a reflection on her and on her policies and on the Obama policies and where we've been for the last 7 or 8 years and where we're going to go. It really will be a referendum on him as opposed to a referendum on her, and that is a very challenging thing for Donald Trump because, this is the second point, the demographics work against him. And quite frankly, the demographics have been a real problem for Republicans for quite some time. In fact, I remember in speeches I was giving before this campaign started, it was, look, the way that Democrats have had an Electoral College advantage now for the last 20 years because they have accurately, well, I don't know what the right way to say is, but they've had this advantage for 20 years because they are bringing in the growing group of voters in this country. They're attracting those voters, and Republicans are not, all right? We are a country now that looks very different than it did in 1980 or 1988 or even 1992 when Bill Clinton won the White House. We are a more diverse country demographically, and younger voters now have surpassed the baby boom, so millennials are now a bigger cohort than baby boomers. They are the biggest generation right now in this country. Where Republicans have done really well in these last couple of elections are with white people over the age of 45, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with white people over the age of 45 as one of them. I will say that. But that is a shrinking percent of the overall electorate. And you guys are smart people, and you are smart business people, and you understand that you should not be going after a shrinking market share, right? You go for where the market is growing. And where the market is growing is with the very people that Donald Trump is actively turning off right now with his campaign. Before this election, actually right after the 2012 election, the GOP sat down and they said, we did an autopsy. And we looked at what went wrong in the 2012 election, and here's what went wrong. Okay, number one, we gotta stop turning off the following groups of people and start attracting them. Women, Latinos, other people of color, young people. Okay. All right, so let's look at that. These are Donald Trump's unfavorable ratings right now. Among Latinos, unfavorable ratings, 79%. Among 18 to 34-year-olds, unfavorable rating, 75%. Among African Americans, unfavorable rating of 79%. Hillary Clinton is struggling in some ways with many voters, not in some ways, she is struggling even with women. If you look at how she does among suburban women, her overall unfavorable rating is -10. His is -46. So if you could find the one candidate who could actually do worse than Mitt Romney among the very groups that Republicans said just 3 years ago we need to do better with, congratulations, you found him. Now look, do I feel 100% confident saying that Hillary Clinton is going to win? No. A lot happens for the next 6 months. I also think that the challenge for Hillary Clinton, besides her own negatives, and again, I hear this and you see this in polling, where you have plenty of voters who say, I don't know that I like Donald Trump, I don't like his temperament, I don't like his style, I don't like his tone. I also don't know that I really like Hillary Clinton, right? There are a lot of those voters right now. But, so there's that, and there is the anything can happen in 6 months that none of us can predict. I also know that, look, Hillary Clinton's a really good fastball hitter, okay? You throw, it could be 90 miles an hour, it could be 100 miles an hour. I think she's equipped to hit it. But Donald Trump isn't gonna throw fastballs. He's like a junk ball pitcher, right? I mean, it's gonna be, and not just like, oh, it's just gonna be some weird like screwball or something. It's gonna be like the file is in his glove and he's filing the ball down, he's licking it. That, you're like, I don't know how to hit that. That's hard. So there's gonna be a lot of that going on. She's an incredibly disciplined candidate and campaigner running against an unbelievably undisciplined candidate and campaigner. And anything can happen. I mean, I'm just trying to think about, I've been trying in my mind to imagine what this first debate is gonna look like. And all I can think is like Thunderdome. You know what I mean? Like, oh my, we might as well put like tigers and rings of fire and just put it all in there and just be like, you two just go at it. Whoever comes out alive, that's who we're gonna pick, and I don't know what to think. The other question is what it means for the down ballot. Look, we're gonna have a real test here as to whether Republican brand is more important than the Republican nominee, or individual candidates can overcome the drag of their individual nominee. Now look, at the end of the day, I think this is gonna be it's starting out to be a close-ish race, meaning I think Hillary Clinton wins by 4 or 5 points, not 50 points, okay? But what does this mean if you're in a blue state, What does this mean for Mark Kirk here, or Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, or Rob Portman, Republican senator in Ohio, or Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, or Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire? Those are all states that went blue for Obama both times, likely, if these numbers hold up, stay blue for Hillary Clinton. Can those candidates overcome that drag? Now, they haven't been able to do that in recent years. As I said, voters are becoming more and more party line. They are not making a distinction between the top of the ticket and the people who are running for Congress and Senate. But Donald Trump provides a unique opportunity to distance, in part because he's not a Republican, right? He is not your traditional Republican. And that may give some Republicans an opportunity to show that, well, I disagree with him on this and this, I agree with him here, but you're not voting for him, you're voting for me. You're also hearing a lot from Republican strategists arguing that the way to save the Senate and to make sure that the House doesn't flip is to run the same script that they did in 1996 when it looked, as we got into September and October, that Bob Dole was going to lose by a big margin. They made the argument that electing a Republican Congress was going to be a check on Clinton. That may be an argument that you're going to hear here and you're going to hear in other battleground states. Vote for Republicans for Congress and the Senate because you don't let Hillary Clinton run away with her agenda. And that may work. I don't know. But it's tough. These are tough states that Republicans have to hold. As I said, pretty blue states in what could be a bad year. But even if the Senate flips this year, it's so easy to believe that it's going to flip right back Republican in 2018. Because up in 2018 are all those Democrats that won in 2012, including Democrats that won in really red states. Joe Donnelly next door in Indiana. They have to defend West Virginia, Montana, North Dakota. So if Democrats have a 2-3 seat majority, they could easily lose that majority in 2018. So I would not feel very confident if I were either party printing up a lot of "we're in the majority" t-shirts, okay? Like, might want to keep those off to the side for a little while. That suggests, much like what you guys are seeing here, that the prognosis going forward is just more gridlock and more dysfunction, right? You are going to have, most likely, a president elected with one of the lowest approval ratings we've seen in modern history. Forget about a honeymoon. There's not even going to be like a weekend trip to Niagara Falls, okay? This is like, people are going to already be like, I hated this campaign. I don't like who this person is who's going to be the president of the United States. The Congress is going to be divided. They will have run equally divisive and ugly campaigns, and it could set up just another awful dysfunctional system. Or, and this is what I'm hoping it could suggest, that the leaders sit down after this election and say, okay, we finally got the message that voters have been sending for the last 10 years that we need to do things a little bit differently, and that we're not going to get what we want, and we have to be willing to buck our own party and to buck our own members and say, these are the 3 or 4 things we're going to get done. I think infrastructure would be an easy place to start. Say, boom, let's do this. We all agree we want to do it. Boom, we all agree that we want some sort of sentencing reform, justice reform. Get 3 or 4 things out of the gate that you don't agree on the particulars, on the details, but you make sure that you get enough Democrats, Republicans, to get over the finish line and to put a finished product in front of the public. Because ultimately, I don't think this is just this weird one strange moment in time election that we're witnessing, like, oh, remember that 2016 campaign, that was crazy, and now things are going to be normal going forward. I think we are hitting a normal, okay? This is the normal, that the forces that are buffeting us right now are real and strong, and they're not going away. Globalization isn't going away. The debate about technology, the demographics, cultural change, this isn't changing. This is only going to get more intense. And unless and until the leaders in the country recognize that the voters in the country trust that the institutions can handle it and look out for them, we're going to see campaigns like this over and over and over again. So I'm hoping that maybe this is the election that folks kind of who we elect get that, but we may not. either way, you might as well buckle in because it's going to be a very bumpy few years that we are about to witness. So, okay, I'm trying not to be so depressing at the end of my speeches, but I can't. I guess the one thing that I had is my like optimistic thing. I was like, well, I mean, it could be worse. We don't have a military coup. We don't have states invading each other yet. So we're doing okay. But I think if I were to say one optimistic thing, it is that ultimately, look, this is we are at a tipping point. Right? We are going through a period of time where we're going to look back 20, 30, 40 years ago. We're going to do history books about this moment in the 21st century and what it was and what it represented. And we're living through it, and living through change is messy and hard and complicated, and there's not an easy answer to any of this. But the way that we're going through it right now is the way we were supposed to do it. It's kind of messy, but we're doing it through the ballot box, and we're going to struggle through this, hopefully together. And at the end of it, come out looking somewhat different, but still being the same America. So with that, questions, comments, accusations of any sort. I guess there are microphones and people already lining up. You guys are fast.
The electorate that they thought was going to turn out, and it was 3 or 4% whiter than the electorate that came out in 2012.
That's
so
right. Can
you make us better consumers of polls when they come out? Because I think there's going to be a few between now and November.
There'll be like a couple polls. The really difficult part, I think, for all of us is there are more polls now than ever, and more of them are crap than ever, right? So how do you do this? I think the best advice I can give, and I think you probably already do this, is to not put too much stock in one poll or one polling operation, but to look at a series of polls. This was the debate I got in with the Romney campaign in 2012 when they would say, you know, well, we think we're going to win. For example, it was about, we're going to win Ohio. And I would say, okay, help me understand this, because every single poll I've seen, public, media, academic, and Democratic, show you guys losing. But you're going to win. Yeah, well, our internal data has something else. Oh, okay. Isn't there a part of you that wonders if everybody else sees this and you guys see something different, that you're wrong? No. We're going to be proven right. So if you see 16 polls showing this and one showing that, I would go with the 16. Ultimately, I do think we're going to get into this battle a lot about polling, which is, you know, again, it's more of an art than a science. And who the electorate is, who's turning out and who's not. And the debate that we'll hear a lot too is about the Rust Belt. Can Donald Trump turn out those blue collar, that working class voter that hadn't turned out in past elections, that didn't turn out for Mitt Romney, and win? And it is true, if you turn out white blue collar voters at the rate that college educated voters turn out, that does change the math. But it assumes that nothing else changes, right? What it also, they've been looking at some data in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, where they gave all of Romney's votes to Trump and every single white vote turn out in 2012, right? Or are regular, they're registered, but they don't vote regularly. All of those to Trump. Still not enough to win. So you can't win just by turning out, which is that debate. But I think for all of you who are going to be watching this race closely, which I think you should, places like Real Clear Politics or HuffPost, it's called pollster.com, aggregate, I think, the best and give you a sense of the broad, right, where things are trending rather than just focusing on one data point. Hi.
Hi, Amy. I'm Jimmy Williams, and thank you very much.
Yeah, you're
I'm
welcome.
from Southern Illinois, East St. Louis, Illinois.
Great.
What's the viability of a third-party candidate? That's my first question. And a comment. I think if we look at what's happening around the world, if you think this is interesting. Imagine what's going on in Brazil right now and all across Europe. So
That's right.
let's put everything in perspective.
That's
I
right.
think we're all right here in the U.S. Last
Yep.
point for you is the Republican establishment and how they're handling this. Do you think that, like the Bush family and others, may not be handling this correctly?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, they're going to have to get behind the nominee. I would just throw that
Yeah,
out.
thank you, Jimmy. And in fact, thank you for, maybe unwittingly promoted my column for this week, which I said, it just went up today, but I don't know if they're miscalculating as much as I don't think it matters as much. I think we, media, are spending a lot of time about the Paul Ryan divide and the divide within the Republican Party and who's the party and the fight among many conservatives about putting a third party candidate who's a conservative Republican, not just a different candidate, but a conservative Republican as an alternative. And I think that is exactly missing the point, and missing the point of this entire election, at least from the Republican side, which is if Republican voters have told us anything this cycle, it's that they don't give a crap what the establishment thinks, okay? What Washington thinks, what the class thinks, they want change and they want it now. And what number I'm watching going to polling is the number I'm watching more closely than how many endorsements does Donald Trump get from his vanquished opponent or from congressional leaders is the percent of Republicans who say they're going to vote for Donald Trump, okay? Core Republican voters. Now, right now, it's not looking good. He's only getting 72% of Republicans right now saying that they would vote for him. Now, in this modern era, you need to hit about 90% in order to win. And that's where all other Republicans since 2000 have been. If his number stays at 72, 75, even 80, he can't win. If it gets up to the 90%, it becomes a much more competitive race. So that number I'm watching much more closely. As for a third party, you would think, given all of this, whatever we want to call this race, has been, would make a third party look better than ever, right? Two of the most unpopular people in politics running against each other, you would think everyone would flock to another choice. But we have two problems. One, while Americans say that they're independent, they identify themselves as independent, they vote very much in a partisan way. There are very few people that truly, I know in their mind they think I vote for the person, not the party, I vote for the candidate, but they really vote for the party. We really have become much, much, much more tribal in our politics. And the polarization of Congress doesn't just happen only because of redistricting and only because of the kinds of people who come to Washington or who come to Springfield, but we send them there. So we have to remember that. The other challenge of a third party, at least in national politics, is the Electoral College. And that fundamentally is why Michael Bloomberg couldn't run. I mean, he knew that in order to win the White House, you get 270 electoral votes, and he wasn't going to be able to do that. At best, he was going to hand a couple of states to Trump, or get enough electoral votes that there was no candidate who got to 270, and it goes to Congress, a Republican Congress, that puts a Republican in the White House. So we are at very complex times. As I said, we have, Americans say more than ever, we want Washington, we want Springfield, we want our institutions to look out for us, get stuff done, and yet we also continue to vote for the very polarizing people that are only looking out for the interests of their tribe. Hi.
Hi, I'm Karen Kurek from RSM. I have a question. A couple of months ago, we heard a lot about the contested convention for
Yeah.
Republicans, and we're not really hearing that anymore in the
No.
media. I know that Donald Trump has gotten more votes, or more electoral votes, but what's your thought on that? Is there going to be a contested convention?
Yeah. So I just tell you a little story about contested conventions and the media. We would love nothing better. I mean, it is like Christmas, New Year's, birthday, with unicorns and puppies all wrapped into one, the idea of a contested convention. Nobody in my generation has ever seen a contested convention. We would love to cover a contested convention, but apparently it is never going to happen. And I don't know in my lifetime if I'll ever see one. This was going to be the year that it happened. But the fact that when Donald Trump did as well as he did, not just in the Super Tuesday states. I mean, winning in Illinois and those other states on Super Tuesday was important. But the whole rationale for denying him the nomination on the floor was that Ted Cruz was going to run up the score in the South, John Kasich was going to in the Midwest and the Northeast, and nobody would get the 1,237 delegates. Well, Ted Cruz didn't do as well as he should have in the South. In fact, he lost a lot of those states to Donald Trump. John Kasich didn't win anything except Ohio and did terribly in the Northeast. And once that happened, there was just zero ability for those candidates to muster either the votes or, and I think this is more important, the PR to win a contested convention. Because even if Cruz stayed in and was able to get enough delegates to deny him the actual number, it was going to be really hard, and you could see this and feel this talking to Republicans, that they didn't want a contested convention. That you saw poll after poll where Republicans were saying, look, whoever has the most votes, even if they don't have the majority of delegates, if you got the most votes, you should be the nominee, period. So there was no appetite within the party writ large for a contested convention, even though those of us coming it would love to see that. So as many of my colleagues wrote the next day, they basically, we spent all this time, it's like studying for finals, and then you're told, you know what, finals are canceled. Like, ugh, why did I study for that? So we threw all of our books out and go ahead to the next time. Hi.
First, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
My name's Tonya Corey, and as a congressional candidate,
Yeah.
thank you for the optimistic view of this whole election cycle.
Yeah, welcome
but I am
to
curious on your
Washington.
thoughts on VP choices for
Yeah.
both candidates.
Again, I tend to I try to be logical in this, which apparently is the worst thing you can do in this election, is to think logically about what you would do if you were one of the candidates. If you're Donald Trump, it seems to me that the most logical thing to do at this point is to pick somebody who is female. That would be, I think, a smart move on his part. Now, the thing he said is he wants somebody who has political government experience, which also makes sense, right? I'm the business guy. I need to hire someone as my VP, pick someone as my VP who's going to be able to talk to the folks in the Capitol. And there are plenty of elected officials out there who could do that. But it would also make a whole lot of sense for the guy who is getting attacked at every turn for being the anti-woman and the woman's card and all of this, to put a woman on that ticket. I don't know if that's what he ultimately will do. We are hearing, every day there's a whole new name coming out. One thing I will warn you about the VP process, do I have time for one story, or do you need to go? Is the media's obsession with figuring out who this is going to be, okay? Which I think is such a waste of time, because nobody's going to know what this is. And I give you as an example this story, which was, I was at ABC News in 2012. As a political director, I had to cover the VP pick for Mitt Romney. And what we would do is we'd send these poor little 24-year-old reporters to stake out the potential VP nominees. I mean, they literally shadowed them everywhere. They went to their house, they went to their place of work, they said hi. We weren't doing it with big glasses hiding in bushes, but it was like, hi, my name's Amy, I'm with ABC News, I'm stalking you, basically, to see if you're going to be picked as a nominee. What is he doing? Who is he meeting with? Where is he going? What is she doing? So my person in front of Paul Ryan's house, I talked to the night that we hear that the next day Mitt Romney's going to make his nominee known in Virginia on this aircraft carrier. And so I check in with all my folks. Okay, do you have Bob McDonnell? Yep, I see him. Okay, do you have your candidate? Whoever, I can't remember. Tim Pawlenty. Yep, I know where Tim Pawlenty is. Okay, where's Paul Ryan? Oh, yeah, the lights are on in the house. Everything's fine. I saw him earlier in the day. Okay. Yeah, it was it was a weird interaction. I mean, he said hello. He told us he forgot his keys, so he went into the back of the house because they hide a key back there. And but he's been in the house ever since then. It's like, okay. So anyway, long story short, the next day, there's Paul Ryan on the aircraft carrier, but nobody saw him leave the house. Nobody saw him get on a plane. We were tracking planes from all over Wisconsin, air tail numbers that flying into the airport there, craziness, such a waste of time. Anyway, well, what we come to find out was Paul Ryan did tell everyone, yeah, I forgot my keys, went to the back of the house, then proceeded to run through the woods behind his house, where there, on the other side of the woods, was a car waiting with his family and all of his stuff. The car took him, I think, to Rockford or somewhere, or in northern Illinois, to get on a plane to fly, okay? Like, that's the amount of effort that they're going through to make sure that we don't find out who the candidate is. And I say that to say, be careful when people say, I know exactly who it's gonna be, because we had people in front of their house and we couldn't figure out who they were, okay? For Hillary Clinton, I think she sort of has two options in front of her. She either makes the sort of double down, like I'm gonna go all in, both on trying to get her base excited with somebody like Sherrod Brown, I think from Ohio, or Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, both with that same populist Bernie Sanders kind of message. Now both of them though, if she picks one of them and she wins, their seat gets filled by the Republican governor of those states. So that's something to think about as well. If she wanted to pick somebody who is a more sort of traditional choice, who would be fine, but I don't know, would add pizzazz or bring in that sort of Bernie base, what do you see, like Kane, the senator from Virginia, former DNC chairman? So that's sort of where I see that going. But I think on Trump, you cannot discount any potential pick. But I do think it will be somebody who comes from a governing world, but it could be anybody from Newt Gingrich to Rudy Giuliani to Bob Corker, senator from Tennessee, to fill in the blank female, Mary Fallin, governor of Oklahoma. But I think that would be a much safer choice for him. Okay, well, thank you guys.
You're watching the Illinois Channel.